It is a great feeling to win brilliant attacking games where everything comes together, from the first to the last move. Unfortunately, this rarely happens in chess, and sometimes you find yourself in a difficult or bad position. Being able to fight back from such positions is one of the most important skills to learn. Let's take a look at this position. After white plays the aggressive queen to g4, threatening black's unprotected g-pawn, black has to make a difficult decision. There isn't a great way to defend the g7 pawn. Black can either push the pawn to g6 or play the move king to f8. When you are in a difficult position, you should try and not make your position worse. Moving the king to f8 and losing the right to castle seems like a bad choice, but let's consider black's other option, g6. Every time a pawn is moved, weaknesses are made. Notice that once the pawn moved from g7, it no longer protects f6 and h6. This means the dark squares have been weakened, and since black does not have a dark squared bishop to protect these squares, this could be a problem later in the game. Notice white has a pawn on h4 and can now use the g6 pawn as a hook to open up the position after h5. White is threatening to open up the h-file with h takes g6, which would open up white's rook on h1. By playing g6, black has created dark square weaknesses and allowed white to open up the position with h5. Let's return to the position after white played queen to g4. Although moving the king looks bad, it turns out to be black's strongest move. After king to f8, black protects the g-pawn and does not make any pawn weaknesses. Black has lost the right to castle, but is this a big problem? In a position with a lot of open lines for attack, this would be a terrible decision. But is this position open? No, it's actually very closed. Notice that the center is locked. And white's king may also prefer to stay in the center where there is less danger at the moment. Black will plan on playing knight g to e7, eyeing the f5 square with a very solid position. Notice that white has an unprotected pawn on c2 that may be attacked with a later queen to a4. That being said, white still has an advantage due to having more space on the king side, and black's rook on h8 may have difficulties getting into the game. By defending with the king, black did not create any weak squares or allow a clear line of attack, so black has made a good defensive decision. In this position, white is cramped for space. The pawn on d4 is preventing both white's dark squared bishop and knight on c2 from being active. Black's pieces are much more active and enjoy the extra space to move freely around the board. White's biggest problem is less space and passive pieces. How can white fight back in this position? Since the d4 pawn is the main cause of white's problems, white can attack its key defender, the c5 pawn, with the powerful move b4. White adds pressure to black's central pawn chain. If black captures the b4 pawn with c takes b4, black's center is destroyed after knight f takes d4, regaining the pawn and opening up the powerful light-squared bishop on the long diagonal. Black can play b6, protecting the c5 pawn, but it gives up protection of the knight and weakens the light squares. Black is in trouble after b5. And after knight a5, white opens up the light-squared bishop with the move knight g5. White's knight and rook attack black's bishop on e6, and white's light-squared bishop is threatening black's rook on a8. Black's best option is to continue development with queen to d7, connecting black's rooks and preparing to offer a trade of bishops with bishop to h3, wanting to remove white's powerful light-squared bishop. Now that white has added pressure to the c5 square, white's bishop on b2 joins the fight with bishop to a3. White has activated the passive bishop on b2 and threatens to win a pawn on c5 on the next turn. Black should play c takes b4. And after knight takes b4, White's dark squared bishop and knight have been activated, and White now has a semi-open b-file to use for a rook to join in putting Black's queenside under pressure. White's active strategy of fighting against Black's space advantage in the center and activating White's passive pieces has greatly improved White's position. Let's take a look at one more example together. In this position, Black has some problems to solve. Black controls less space, has a white rook pointing directly at Black's king, and has to figure out how to develop the dark squared bishop. King safety is a serious issue, as castling queenside would lose a pawn to bishop takes f7. What is Black to do? One natural idea for Black is to play e6, opening up lines for the dark squared bishop and also preventing White's light squared bishop from capturing f7. Unfortunately for Black, White's active pieces blast open Black's defenses, starting with the crushing sacrifice, bishop takes e6. After f takes e6, and knight takes e6. For the moment, White has sacrificed a bishop for 2 pawns, but notice that the white knight is attacking Black's queen. Now that the e-pawn has been removed, the only piece blocking Black's king from White's rook is the white knight on e6. This means there will be a discovered check after Black moves the queen. After queen to b6, can you find White's powerful discovered check in this position? If you found knight to c7 check, great job. White's knight leaves the e-file, discovering the rook's check on the Black king, and also threatens to capture the rook at the same time. Black's king will be stuck in the center of the board, so White will regain the sacrificed material by capturing Black's rook and have great attacking chances against Black's weak king. Since the natural move e6 doesn't work, what should Black do? Castling queenside would make Black's king safe and allow Black to complete development, but didn't we say the f7 pawn was hanging if Black castled queenside? How can he defend the f7 pawn before castling queenside? Grandmaster David Bronstein, playing the Black pieces, made the surprising move bishop to g8. Black's active bishop on h7 is buried on g8, but this solves Black's problems with the f7 pawn. Once the f7 pawn was protected, Bronstein was able to castle queenside. Black solved the biggest problem in the position, king safety, by playing the ugly-looking bishop g8 move. When you play difficult or bad positions, you have to be creative and decide if a move works or not. No matter how ugly it may look, play the move if it works. Now it's time to see if you can manage difficult positions.